Hey, Empowered Advocates. We've got a great episode for you today, and just a little heads up before we get started. In this episode, we interview an author, and it's long distance. She's in Tennessee. So if you hear a little bit of background noise or a little bit of static, it's because we had a bit of a weak internet connection. But I would encourage you, challenge you actually, don't let that keep you from listening to this episode. You're going to want to listen to it all the way through because it's got some great stuff, and I know it's going to bless you and the people that you share it with. So let's get on with our intro. You're listening to The Empowered Advocate, a podcast from Greensboro Pregnancy Care Center. Hey guys, welcome back to The Empowered Advocate. I am your host, Mary Holloman. And if this is your first time listening, welcome. We're really glad that you've tuned in and that you've chosen to spend some time with us this morning. If you haven't already, please subscribe. You can find The Empowered Advocate anywhere where you find podcasts. The purpose of this podcast is to empower and equip you, the listener, to advocate for life at every stage, from conception until natural death. And so we really want to equip you by covering a lot of different topics. We talk about abortion, adoption, we talk about sexual ethics, biblical sexuality, all kinds of things. And we want to hear from you. If you have ideas about things you want to hear that we have not covered yet, feel free to contact us, leave us a comment, and we'd love to hear from you. So today, I'm very excited about this episode. It's October 2019, so this is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. And so we wanted to take some time to do an episode to draw attention to this month, to the many women who have experienced pregnancy loss. And it's a heavy topic, but one that we just really felt like needed to have some time spent on. So this morning we have a special guest with us that we get to talk with. Her name is Sarah Philpott, and she is the author of Loved Baby, 31 Devotions, helping you grieve and cherish your child after pregnancy loss. So I'm just going to give a little background on Sarah, and then we're going to give her the floor and hear from her for a little bit. So Sarah is the mother of 3 young children and wife to a hard-working farmer who has been her sweetheart since high school. She's a former elementary teacher and went on to earn her PhD at the University of Tennessee. She's an award-winning writer who has contributed to numerous academic books such as Contemporary Social Studies and Essential Reader, and has been published in scholarly journals such as Social Studies and The Young Learner. She also contributes to places such as the Huffington Post, Her View from Home, Bon Bon Break, Bethany Christian Services, and Pregnant Chicken. And she is also the founder of the Loved Baby Pregnancy Loss Support Group and the hashtag Honor All Moms Mother's Day movement. At the end of this episode, we'll give you her website and some ways that you can connect with her. Sarah, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
It's a pleasure to be with you today, Mary. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and just for those listening, I actually met Sarah a few years ago at the Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference. And I don't know if you remember this, Sarah, but I was looking for a place to eat, and I sat down and I sat next to you, and we got to talking, and you handed me a copy of Loved Baby when I told you about my work at the pregnancy center. And we now have a whole box load of your books that we give to our clients who experience pregnancy loss. And it has just been a huge blessing to the women that we serve. So I'm so glad I ran into you.
I am too. That was a lunch date that was meant to happen.
Absolutely. Well, Sarah, we want to hear from you. So go ahead and tell us. We want to jump right into this. When you wrote Loved Baby, who exactly were you writing it for?
When I wrote Loved Baby, I had had 2 miscarriages myself. And while I was going through that process, I just realized there wasn't necessarily a wealth of information for women to help support them through any type of pregnancy loss, miscarriage, stillbirth, ectopic pregnancy. And I just really wanted to create a resource for a woman who, whether she'd experienced loss 2 weeks ago or 20 years ago, to just help her walk through that journey of grief. And when I wrote Loved Baby, I was able to interview so many women and men as well, and they shared their stories with me. So it's not only my perspective of loss, the book's not just my perspective of loss, it's not just medical knowledge, but it men and men. So I think it just really serves as a kind of a book of solidarity where you just don't feel so alone after you've experienced it, because 1 in 4 women experience miscarriage. 1 in 160 births unfortunately end in stillbirth. A really unfortunate circumstance when these babies are born um, in the unintended way.
Right. Yeah, and that stat 1 in 4 is really startling. I mean, that's a very high percentage, and I know I personally have experienced the pain of pregnancy loss, and man, it affects not just not just me, but my husband and my children. So I totally understand about the far-reaching impact of these losses. Can you talk a little bit about why you mentioned in your book that you call pregnancy loss an invisible grief? Can you talk a little bit about that? So how is it invisible, even though, as you just mentioned, a lot of women are experiencing it?
Yes, it's so invisible, and a lot of women are experiencing it. And often, in the case of a miscarriage, it's often before they've even announced their pregnancy, and they find themselves having lost their pregnancy. And so no one ever knew they were pregnant. So they don't necessarily come forward and say, well, I was pregnant, but I've lost the baby. It's also, even in the case of stillbirth, it's an invisible grief because as a society, we don't necessarily know how to respond when a woman and a family's experience pregnancy loss. And many times women just hold that loss in their hearts and they don't want to talk about it. One of the reasons I think they don't want to talk about it is because they're afraid of how their friends, their family, their neighbors are going to respond. Because historically, as a culture, we've said some really harsh words to women who experience pregnancy loss. We'll say, well, at least you were early, or, well, you have other children, or other things like that. And they don't really take the whole grieving process into effect. So I think a lot of women have just kind of stayed silent about it, and they don't mention it. And that's one of the reasons I feel that it's an invisible grief.
That's so good. And I think, one thing we hit on here at the Pregnancy Center is the value of life from conception. And it's so interesting because you see that kind of play out with pregnancy loss. I feel like that idea of infinite value from conception is really challenged when you realize that not everyone responds in a way that you would expect when a life is lost so early. And so I know for me personally, I struggled with that a lot in terms of, why is no one reacting like my child has died? Just because it was early, it doesn't, why is it different? And so it's a lot of internal struggle. Now you mentioned some things that people say that can be hurtful, but maybe, they don't realize it. You mentioned in your book that there's one question we really need to stop asking couples. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think we've all experienced it. Once you get married, the question is, so when are you going to start having a baby? And, or after you've had one or two, then people will come up and say, so is it time for number two? And we don't realize what a charged question that is, because I think this goes with the invisible grief part of it. There are so many couples who are trying and trying and trying to have a child, and whether they are infertile or whether they're going through some silent pregnancy losses, we're not aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so easy to make that assumption, but we just don't know what people are going through. And now,
We don't.
yeah, and on that note, so we talked a little bit about the internal struggle that women experience. A lot of women, and I know this has been true for me too, a lot of women will blame themselves about the pregnancy loss and drive themselves nuts trying to figure out what they did to cause it. Because I think a lot of times as women, we want to know what we did, and we want to fix it. We want a reason. So can you talk a little bit about that? What are the real causes of miscarriage, stillbirth, and should women be blaming themselves? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I'll talk about that because I know that was one thing that I experienced and I was just really unprepared for. After my 2 miscarriages, I I could kind of say like I was on a quest for the Holy Grail to try to figure out what had happened, had why had this occurred. And one of the things that I found out was that most women, after having pregnancy loss, blame themselves. And this is just anecdotally through all my questioning with women, but also I found it in scholarly research that that's one of the immediate reactions we have is this self-blame. Whereas when we're going through it ourselves, we kind of think we're going a little bit crazy having all these emotions. But that self-blame is extremely misguided. And I just want your listeners to know that there is no reason whatsoever for a woman to ever blame themselves for a pregnancy loss. The majority of time, a miscarriage is because of a chromosomal abnormality. It's something completely out of our hands. It wasn't because you ran too many miles or you have a little bit of extra stress at work. It is something completely out of our hands. And as women, we really have to combat this misguided shame and blame with putting truths into our minds that we didn't do anything to do it. But I think one of the reasons we do blame ourselves, I actually just this week was handed my father's baby book he was born in the 1950s, and my grandmother had this Better Homes and Garden baby book, and it had all kinds of information in it about how you should prepare yourself for your baby's arrival. And I read in the book, I couldn't believe what I was reading. And it would say things like, don't go on long car journeys because that could cause a miscarriage. And so I think historically, there were just so many notions about what caused a miscarriage, and it was completely misguided, the causes of it. And so I think that not only do we have this intrinsic desire to blame ourselves, but historically, a lot of times in the medical community, and not necessarily the medical community, but just in culture, it was put as if it was something the woman had done. So I think that's one of the reasons why we have to talk about pregnancy loss, is so we can kind of take these stereotypes and dispel them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things about the culture that we're in now is things like Google. I know for me, after we lost our babies, I went to Google and I said, "Google, give me answers," and started typing in all the things. And oh my goodness, it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. We can drive ourselves crazy with the need to know everything and to analyze. And I think, one of the things that, at Greensboro Pregnancy Care Center, we are a faith-based organization. And so one of the hard things about this is having to accept the fact that, we are not God and we don't always understand all the ins and outs of why things happen. And so that's where our faith comes in and can really help us as we're, trying to battle against that self guilt. So that's so good. I'm interested in how you started sharing your story. I mean, after you experienced your losses, did you start being vocal about your experiences right away, or did it take some time? How did that come about?
I was not very quick on the draw of sharing my journey. I'm more of an internal processor and more of an introvert. And so my journey, of course, in the immediate time was shared with my husband. My parents were wonderful, my in-laws, and a very close-knit group of friends. And that's kind of the way I wanted to grieve. And I think we need to know that about ourselves, whether we're introverts or extroverts, how we want to honor our own grief process. We don't have to follow how someone else grieves. So for me, I just needed that close knit group of friends. Whereas other people, they want so many people to surround them with love and show them love. And that's okay. But we just have to honor that about ourselves. So my journey kind of, once I started writing about it, just privately to myself, I realized that I wanted to share my experiences to try to show love to other women. So it took me almost a year to be able to share my journey, but at that point I was ready to be able to talk about it a little bit more so. And so I think that's kind of interesting that I'm extremely public about it now, but in the beginning I was extremely private.
Yeah, and you alluded to it. You said it about how it's just a process, and that's okay. It's okay for it to take some time. Well, speak to the woman who is listening who has experienced a pregnancy loss or stillbirth. What are some steps for self care that she can take as she's going through this process of grieving?
I think one of the first things we have to do, and you talked about it earlier, is to recognize that this is a life. No matter how early you lost your baby, it is a life. As soon as we see that pregnancy test, we have dreams for our baby. We associate ourselves as having a pregnant identity, and we have a future ahead of us. And when we experience loss, we lose all three of those aspects of ourselves. So I think we need to definitely um, know that this was a life that we lost. And whether other people tell us that or not, we are assured of that. And as a faith-based person, we are assured that that child is in heaven now. More practically, we also have to we have to take time to grieve. We have to take time to mourn. We have to take care of ourselves, and that may be kind of slowing our lives down a little bit, just to go into go to our bedroom and just cry. Sometimes we have to just honor whatever emotions we're feeling at the time. So I think one of the most important self-care steps we can do is to recognize that it is okay to mourn, and that we do have to go through the process of grief. Just like any other death, this is a big event, and we're not ever going to necessarily recover from it, but we're going to get through it, and we don't need to step over the emotions along the way.
Yeah, that's good. I love that. What are some ideas you might throw out for ways to grieve, ways to honor that unborn child? What are some things that the people you have talked to have done, or some things that maybe you've done yourself personally?
I think there's so many different things we can do. One of the things is to write it out, to write out our story. Another thing is to kind of, it's really hard when we have a nursery that's already been built, or we have all of these baby items, and we wonder, what are we going to do with them? What are we going to do with the ultrasound? And so I think when we put them in a special place in our house, maybe create a box or a special little drawer where we have all of our baby's items. Um, I know many women have a special piece of jewelry to just kind of honor their baby that they wear. And I think that's really creates some tangible items that women can hold on to, and to see that symbolizes their sweet baby that's now in heaven. So those are some kind of things that I've seen women do. I've also seen that from what I've talked to with women, from myself, and also from all of the research about grief, we need to make sure that although it's extremely hard, we have to go through the process of saying goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
And for some, that might look like a funeral for a stillborn baby. It might look like, I know some women have done balloon releases, or different things like that. But some women, like myself, just kind of had a private goodbye. But I think taking time to say goodbye, we have to have that ceremonial aspect of it, whether it's public or whether it's private. We really need that.
Yeah, that's so good. And each of those things ascribe dignity to that life too, which I
Which it
think is
does.
so needed. Yeah. Um, Now you talked about it. We mentioned it a little bit earlier on when we first started talking, but sometimes people will say things. They don't know exactly how to react to a pregnancy loss, and sometimes you feel like you need to say something, and so things start coming out of our mouths that may not be the most sensitive. So, what advice would you give to someone who knows someone who's experienced a pregnancy loss? What advice would you give to them for how to reach out and support that friend?
I think most people do want to show support, and most people do want to show love. It just unfortunately they don't know how to. And so sometimes they do nothing at all. And that silence is kind of it's a sad thing for a woman who's experienced loss. So above all, just to show love and compassion. So that may look like sending a card in the mail. I'm so sorry for the loss of your sweet baby, and then just sign your name. It might look like delivering a plate of cookies or a cake, just, a symbol of love. Sending flowers. A lot of women put together just beautiful care packages that might include some hot tea, a journal, a book, things like that. Maybe some, DVDs or some books to read to kind of, while the woman is kind of at home going through that process. So I think just showing love and compassion, just what we know to do with any other type of death, just to show dignity. A lot of women also really appreciate when a friend might give like a rose bush, and the mother can plant it, the family can plant it in their backyard. Just things like that are really nice and lovely and needed. I think some of the things you definitely shouldn't say, and like I said, a lot of friends want to show love, but it just comes out of their mouth the wrong way. And a few of the things are, well, at least you can have another, but that doesn't take into account perhaps maybe she can't. She might have had a hysterectomy with her with her pregnancy loss, or she may have faced 10 years infertility before this loss. So it's not as easy as just, well, at least you can have another. And another reason that wording hurts is because it's not taking into account the value of this life that was lost, this precious baby. A woman and a family is mourning for this specific child. So all in all, the best piece of advice I can give to a friend is to just say, I'm so sorry. You are loved, and I'm here for you during this time. Another practical piece of advice is, a lot of women feel really lonely on their due date, or a year later from their baby's death. So one thing that I recommend is, if you are close friends with someone and you know the day their baby passed away, mark it in your phone to a calendar for a year later. And when you see that pop up on your phone, just send a card, send a text, make a phone call. And it can be something as simple as, I'm thinking of you today. And the woman who has experienced pregnancy loss is definitely going to feel loved and feel as if her baby is remembered.
That's huge. Yeah, I love those things. And one of the most meaningful things for me that I received, it was just like a card that said, "I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry." And I
Yes.
appreciated that because I didn't know what to say either. And but I
Yes.
appreciated just her putting that out there. I don't know exactly what you need. I don't know how to respond, but I am sorry. And that I held that really close to my heart. Another thing, my grandfather, he's a woodworker, so he likes to make gifts for his grandchildren. And the moment we told him we were expecting, he immediately started working on a gift. And he
Oh.
still gave it to me right after we found out. And he said, "This is for your babies." And it just really
Oh.
ascribed dignity to those lives, like you mentioned. It was like, I just appreciated that it wasn't, "Oh, well, they're not here, so I can like do something else with this that I made." It was still theirs. So that was just so powerful. You mentioned some things things people shouldn't say. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think and people really want to help, like you said, and sometimes they just start spouting out things like you said, "You can always try again." But what are some of the maybe responses that people should just steer clear from?
Yes, well, at least you can have another, or
Mhm.
at least you can try again. That's one that definitely steer clear from. What a lot of times women have also heard, well, at least it was early,
Yeah.
and that doesn't give dignity at all, and that's just such a slap in the face, because from the moment this child is conceived, you love this child, and in our Christian faith especially, we know that that child is in heaven now. And for someone to say, well, at least it was early, that's painful. Another painful thing is, well, you have other children.
Yeah.
And absolutely, you may have other children, and you may love those other children. Not you may, you do love those other children, but you also loved this child that was knitted in your womb as well. Another thing that can be painful is, of course, I said the silence, when a friend doesn't say anything at all, when they know what's going on, but they say absolutely nothing. So I think those are some things that we just really have to steer clear of. But also to know, as a woman who's experiencing pregnancy loss, you have to kind of go into it realizing that words are going to hurt, and that people are going to inadvertently say some things, even saying something such as it was God's will or just adopt. Yes, adoption's a wonderful option, but again, you've got to realize that we're grieving for the specific loss of a specific child. So those are some things that we need to definitely steer clear of, and to just exactly like what you said, if you don't know what to say, just send a card that says I have no words, because truthfully, that sums up this experience. There are no words to describe this intimate loss that you've experienced.
Yeah, that's so good. And I know one thing I experienced that you mentioned as I was reading through your book, I really appreciated, I think there was a chapter on like preparing yourself for what people will say or what may be said. And I think that's so good too, because it really helped me to not get angry at people for responses that just weren't that well thought out. It helped me to show some grace and to know that, this is just part of this hard experience. And so that's another way that I think the book is so relevant. So for those of you listening, definitely grab a copy, because it's really good at preparing your heart for the road ahead, because it is a long grieving process. So Sarah, in your book, you, like you mentioned, you've interviewed several women and some men about their experiences, and one of the men that you featured in your book had a really strong reaction after the loss of his twin girls, and he was really, really angry with God. Um, this anger, is this a common reaction for mothers and fathers, and how can Christians sort through those feelings?
Yes, Brent and Rachel, they lost their twin girls at, I think it was 18 or 19 weeks pregnancy. And Rachel described her experience as, of course, grieving and mourning to a horrible degree, but she felt that the experience brought her closer to God. Whereas Brent just had this immediate anger towards God. And I think that resonates with so many of us. And then we feel that guilt that we're angry with God. So we have to reconcile that. I think it's a very common reactions. And I think as a Christian, we have to realize that God made all of our emotions. He made us to have these emotions, and he can handle them. And I think I think back to First Samuel, where she went up into the to talk to the priest and just cried out to God with anger. And I think that shows that that's what we have to do as Christians. If we feel that, we have to go to him and talk to him about these emotions we're feeling. We have to talk to him about this anger, and we can't feel guilty for feeling that way either. We have to realize this is part of the process, but we have to stay guarded that and pray against the anger. But it's okay to feel angry at that time. So I think it is a common reaction. I think as a Christian, we have to use that to continue a conversation with God, pray through that anger, express it, and then draw close to the Bible to realize that um, God is with us all the time, and he wants to help us walk through this horrible time. He wants to help us walk through it. So Brent, he went through almost a year of just profound anger, and then one day he said, he tried to keep drawing closer to God, and it broke, and he now feels, more of that peaceful assurance that his children are in heaven, but the anger has dissipated.
Right. That's so good. And I think it's so comforting to know as a Christian that God is not intimidated or afraid of our anger. Like you said, that open communication, like we can take those emotions and feelings to him. And some scripture that has been really close to my heart is in Psalms, and it talks about how God keeps track of our tossings and he keeps our tears in his bottle. And so he's just intimately aware of the feelings behind this experience, and like you said, cares about it. He's close to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. So that's so good. One other question I'd love to ask you, as far as children. So if there's a pregnancy loss when you already have children, do you have any advice about how to talk to young children about what has happened, and how to present the truth of what happened in a way that's safe and, considerate of their hearts.
Absolutely. When there's other children in the household, it just compounds that grief because not only are you mourning for yourself, but now you're having to try to usher your children through grief and often their first experience with death. So it absolutely is going to depend on their age. But I think from what I have read, as far as from the very best of grief research, we have to just tell the truth very honestly and very simply. And we need to make sure to use words such as, even though it's hard to say, we have to be able to say things like, the baby died. We can't say the baby's sleeping in heaven or the baby, flew away to be an angel, because that just really confuses children. If you're going to say, well, the baby's sleeping, the sibling's going to say, well, why can't the baby wake up? Or why can't we go see the baby? So we have to say those hard words of things such as death, and we also need to admit, we are sad. This is really hard for us. We are sad, and we're going to be here together. um, we also need to be mindful that saying things such as God needed our baby um, can be confusing for a child as well. If you explain this loss in spiritual terms, you need to be prepared right away to have a spiritual answer that's going to bring peace and not fear, because your child's going to start thinking, well, maybe God's going to need me. Am I going to die tomorrow? We just need to be able to explain that, something medically happened to the baby. It was out of our hands, but death is a natural process of life. And we know, though, that our baby is in heaven. We also need to understand that questions, of course, from children are gonna linger. Where is heaven? Where did baby go? So you're really gonna not only be exploring grief for yourself, but you're gonna probably dive into it a little bit more than you expected, because kids ask really profound spiritual questions. But they also, I've found from talking to women, some of the most beautiful stories I've heard are of, kind of 6 months after losing a child, their 3-year-old will come up to them and say things like, Mommy, God really loves our baby. God's rocking our baby today. And it's almost like God sending that peaceful assurance through the children. So just to I think these expect you're going to have really challenging questions, and just do the very best you can, but just choose your words with as much honesty as you can.
Right. That's so helpful. Well, Sarah, as we wrap up, can you share a little bit, how have women been reacting to Loved Baby? What's some of the things you've been hearing?
I've been so just honored by the reactions. I just wanted to create a book that women could walk alongside with them, and I get emails and social media messages almost daily, just women saying they appreciate having kind of a team of women with them through this book. It's also just been an amazing experience. The book's received several national awards, which I was really excited for, because it just shows that the topic got national attention, which is so needed, and for us not to be silent about it. So it's been an honor to know that this book is sitting on the bedstands of women as they're going through this really hard time.
Yeah, and congratulations on the awards. I know Book of the Year a few times, right?
Yes, it's won Book of the Year a few times, and it's just been an amazing honor, because I know that when I first started trying to get this book published, even in the Christian community, it was a little bit, oh, we don't want to publish this book. This is a really hard topic, and it's needed, but it's a hard topic. We don't want to publish it. And so for it to have finally broken through to be published and then to receive these awards, I think it just really shows kind of a little bit of a shift in society, that we're going to start showing love to all women a bit better.
All right. Well, Sarah, this has been just such an honor to talk with you on this, like you said, topic that is so difficult. Just for, I'll say on behalf of myself and other women, thank you so much for your transparency and actually putting your story and other stories on paper, because I know this book is allowing so many women to realize that they're not alone and that there's a community out there support to really help facilitate that healing. So thank you for that. For our listeners, we're excited to offer a couple of free copies of Sarah's book, Loved Baby. So if you're listening, here's how you can go about getting some of those copies. If you will subscribe to the Empowered Advocate, if you have not already, so just subscribe and then leave us a review. And once you have done that, head on over to Greensboro Pregnancy Care Center's Facebook page and leave a comment on our social media posting where we share this podcast, and you will be automatically entered into a drawing to win one of 2 copies of Loved Baby. And I know I personally have gifted this book to a lot of friends, so I'd recommend every woman have a copy, even if you've never experienced a pregnancy loss, because someone you know has, and you'll definitely want to be able to share that with people. Sarah, how can listeners go about following you or keeping up with you?
And my website is called allamericanmom.net, and you can go there and you can connect with me on social media. You can find me on social media at Sarah Philpott. I think it is Sarah Philpott PhD because Sarah Philpott was already taken. But if you click in Sarah Philpott, you should be able to find me, in the same on Instagram. It's at Sarah L. Philpott. And I'd love to connect with women and with readers, and just know that if you are listening to this and you've experienced pregnancy loss, just know you are so loved, and we just want to wrap our arms around you right now during this time.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. It's been a pleasure, and we're looking forward to sharing your resources with so many other women. Those of you listening, like I said, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast, and then let us know that you've done so. And we'd love to share a copy of Loved Baby with you. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes later this month. We will be tackling some other topics on the topic of pregnancy loss as we try to raise awareness this month. So thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you so much.